You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 21. Today I'll be talking to Matt Eaton. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist and curator Matt Eaton. It was actually Powwow Worldwide founder Jasper Wong who first suggested that I have Matt on the show. If you've listened to the show before, you'll know that I always ask each guest at the end who they'd like to see me have on a future episode. And Matt was one of the people that Jasper recommended way back in episode 4, largely due to how community-oriented Matt's career has been, focusing on uplifting and enabling artists, helping to grow the artist community there in Detroit. We talk about his passion for helping artists get their start on the show, as well as his early interest in graffiti culture, his own artistic style, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Matt Eaton. Matt, welcome to the show, man. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so let's dig into your background a little bit.
Sure.
From what I've read, you were born in Mendocino, California, which is in the northern part of California, but you didn't spend a whole lot of time there. Most of your early childhood you spent in LA. So that's like late 70s, early 80s. What was your childhood like? Like, what kind of stuff were you into?
It was interesting. My parents kind of retired to Mendocino, where I was born. My dad had inherited a lot of money. My mom was a successful theater actress with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So they were like, cool, let's go be hippies in the woods. Had a log cabin with a fucking redwood growing through the patio. It was beautiful. So I do actually have my first memories of being there. But they discovered pretty soon that, hippie lifestyle only goes so far. So I had to move to LA so my mom could get back into work. My dad could get back into work. So, it was it's a really strange time of stuff. It's just weird to talk about in retrospect, but, it was wonderful. We lived mostly in Los Feliz kind of area. We lived in Burbank for a while, North Hollywood. You just grew up, going to the beach for Christmas and Thanksgiving and surfing and boogie boarding and, just that, bleach blonde kind of California kid lifestyle, skateboarding. So very, very stereotypical Southern California type upbringing. Yeah, very much so. The only twist is that my mother's an actress. So, we spend a lot of time in the theater with her, so like Phoebe Cates might be babysitting my brother while, Pee Wee Herman comes over to say hi, or we go out to dinner with like Mr. T, or like just bizarre, weird characters. So there was all this interesting stuff happening in our lives. So we're surrounded by creatives the whole time. My father, I've said this all the time, but it's still funny to me. But on my birth certificate, under his occupation, it lists the word adventurer, and he was an adventurer. He tried so many different things. There was a long period of time where they were just wrapped up in some weird stuff that ultimately a combination of things led to us moving to London, England, or actually Wales first. Kind of at the drop of a dime, like within 24 hours. It was pretty fast. But California was wonderful, man.
And you were like 11 at that point when you guys moved in London.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It was God, I can't remember what year it was, like 86 or something like that. Maybe I was 12 or maybe I was 11. I don't know, man. I did way too many drugs. I can't remember.
What prompted that move? Was it your entire family?
It was my younger brother Tristan and our mother and father. We moved. My father at the time was doing background checks for the like Southwestern Federal Bureau of Investigations, like providing documentary evidence for the government or defendants they were trying to protect, and got in a little bit of hot water in a job he refused to do. That's part of it. Another part was their refusal to comply to the Church of Scientology at the time.
Oh, okay.
And it goes pretty deep. Maybe that's a story for another time. It's a long, weird thing. But it was basically my brother and I were in bed one night, and our mother said, "How would you feel about moving to, England?" And that's where all our family was, really. My father had one sister who was estranged in the United States. We didn't really know them well. So we're like, that'd be great. And, like 24 or 48 hours later, we were gone. And this is like leaving, we were able to buy a brand new skateboard the next day, and that's what we could bring with us.
Oh, wow.
Everything, left everything.
And so, like, was that difficult for you? I mean, you had your whole friend, like all your friends that you had built up from age, whatever you moved to California or whenever you moved to LA up till 11, you had to leave all of that behind. Was that a challenge?
Absolutely, especially because we moved around a lot, even in LA. We had about 10 different houses in 10 different neighborhoods over, those first 11, 12 years, so we went to a few different schools. The one school we went to longest, Los Feliz Hills Apple School, started off as a Scientology school. Actually, Beck Campbell went there, Giovanni Marissa Ribisi went there, Lisa Marie Presley went there, Soleil Moon. There was a bunch of like, John Travolta would be at our bike-a-thons. It was surreal, but funny enough, all those people who were bounced out for wanting to kind of think for themselves became our extended family, and they're still part of our, we love my brothers and sisters and their aunts and uncles and godparents. Nothing to do with that shit at all, but it that experience kind of evolved into something greater, and it manifested into like lifelong relationships and friends. So it was hard to leave. At the time, we were too young to really know any better, but because we had bounced around a lot, and moving to, I think the hardest part was actually being in the UK, where we were always, to my British friends, I was American Matt, and then after a few years, I was English Matt to my American friends, because we were young enough to like pick up accents, and our mother has a strong British accent her whole life in our household. So, and we'd go on holiday for 3 months every year, the entire time we were growing up. So. And
was she still doing theater work even when you moved to London?
Yeah, it's funny. This is like in my personal feelings, like the great tragedy of my mom's life in a lot of ways, that she was very successful in LA. She was an ex-Royal Shakespeare Company actress, doing theater, amazing theater work and television work and film work, and finding great success. And she gave it all up to kind of move to the UK, where over the next several years, she built up an amazing career again, and became very renowned. And, her friends, her close friends are some revered British actors and actresses. So, she was in good company always, and working on amazing plays that were touring worldwide and to critical acclaim. And ultimately, she gave that up again to move to Michigan, because my father had had his like third stroke at that time, and for some reason wanted to come here.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, considering that both you and your brother became artists ultimately, you must have grown up in sort of an environment that fostered creativity. You mentioned that a little bit earlier, but is that something that your parents actively encouraged in you?
Oh, absolutely. Our entire environment, all of our mother's friends were painters and cartoonists and recording artists and actors. And so everyone was always sketching or singing or, writing poetry. It was wonderful. So you had no choice but to be fascinated by these people. And also, when you're, Stephen Burkoff, or you just watch Beverly Hills Cop and Stephen Burkoff is talking wrong, you're like, whoa, that's the evil guy from the movie. Like, and he thinks my drawing is cool. It's like, of course you're going to look for those kind of guiding lights and high points, to direct you. Especially as we had so many of my mom's early friends were, in the gay community back then in theater. Sorry, there's thunder happening in the background. They had such a rich, diverse group of friends, so there was a lot of influence from different types of people with different life experiences. So it was natural that we gravitate toward these things that were like adventurous and different and weren't boring, And everyone looked up to these other people. So it was like they were, larger than life in a lot of ways. So of course you aspire to that,
Yeah, for sure. And from what I understand, while you guys were in London, that was where you really kind of got heavily involved in the graffiti scene. How did that first become an interest for you?
Actually, it's funny. It became an interest for me when I was in third grade in the United States first.
Oh, wow.
I had saved up a lot of money to buy a ninja suit. So and a wooden sword, because I wasn't allowed to have a real sword. So I got this freaking ninja suit, and it was the proudest moment of my life. And one day, while actively enjoying my ninja suit on the block, a friend of mine named Marvin, who I went to Cherimoya school with in LA, came up and said, "Hey, I have this tape. Would you want to listen to it?" And I listened to it, and it had UTFO, Roxanne, and then right after it, Roxanne's Revenge by Roxanne Shante, and then like some early Houdini and stuff like, and early hip hop. And I was so blown away. I'd never heard anything like that before. I was listening to like, punk rock and heavy metal. And I was like, I had to have that tape. I didn't know, of course, you could go to a record store and you could buy, I was also like, however many years old, like 9 or I don't know. And so I traded him my prized ninja suit for this tape. But that tape got me into breakdancing and graffiti culture. And we had actually grown up on that street was a street called Wilton Place. And directly across the street from us, the old folk singer Donovan's children lived. Ione Skye, the actress who was married to Beastie Boys and Anthony Kiedis from Chili Peppers eventually. She would babysit us all the time. She was a friend. And Donovan, the older brother, actually was in, I think it was either Beat Street or Breaking to Electric Boogaloo as a kind of backup breakdown dancer. So that guy was living across the street from me. I idolized him. I was like, oh man, cool pink parachute pants with powder blue polo shirt with, Pumas. Oh my gosh, suede Pumas. So that's what actually got me into graffiti.
Nice.
And DJing and breakdancing and more aware of music in general before even moving to London. So I went to London with that knowledge and experience paired with Southern California, skateboard, kind of horror, gore art and punk rock, So I was listening, one of those kids listening to like, Circle Jerks and Dead Kennedys and also like Black Flag and, Black Sabbath. And of course, so it was like all this rebellious music and hard hitting. I've never been into anything like, I'm into like dance hall, not reggae. I'm into heavy metal, not rock. I'm into like dark drum and bass, not, house music.
It's like the extremes of everything.
Yeah, I love it. It just, for some reason, it calms me down. But, so I went there with all this baggage. And, of course, you're in search of other people, like-minded people who, fortunately in my neighborhood in Chiswick in London, I found these kids who were also skateboarding and also into weird things. And we just met up. It was natural, we became best friends and we did everything together.
Were you guys going out and like painting in the streets regularly?
Oh, yeah. Oh, very, very much so. And in our own little bubble, like eventually you start to know, oh, there's other people doing this. But we were watching like American videos and stuff. And that's how you'd see graffiti in London, of course, and there were big names you'd see everywhere. And eventually you'd meet some of those and we'd realize that like, oh, okay, we have, this guy and this guy of this crew actually live close to us, and we tag along with them, and we'd hang out with those guys, and we became in the circle of extended friendship. We had our own little crew, and yeah, man, we'd go on the subway, we hide under the platform, we'd go all over the place. We'd skip school and go skateboarding and do graffiti like on the other side of London. You know what I mean? And at the time, it was like we didn't know what the fuck we're doing. So like every couple weeks, it'd be a different name, a different crew. We'd always come up with new cool stuff. Then we'd come up with a cool name. Then you'd see that name 3 days later. Like, God damn it, So it was one of those things. I think we were more in the rebellious destruction kind of arena than the like, let me go create art. It eventually evolved into that, but yeah.
While you were becoming more and more involved with the graffiti community there, were you also learning any of the academic side of art, like through school? Were you taking classes in school?
It's funny. I attempted to. I just barely graduated high school, and I barely attended one college before being kicked out and just being. I was doing acid, ecstasy, coke. I was stealing cars. We were getting in fights. I was not the right person to be in school at the time, and fortunately my parents were very helpful and like found other ways. Like I went to a couple of other little kind of very focused little art schools where I learned about like photography and silk screening, calligraphy, architectural drawing, and then lots of courses like teen courses and things like that. And I got to work, in a little dancehall reggae recording studio and also a little design studio. And the design studio was actually a big part of that because it was a lesbian couple that were super open-minded, super interested in doing cool stuff. And this is like, you draw something, you make a photocopy of it, you put it through the wax printer, then you stick that wax piece onto the page. It was like keyline.
Wow.
There was no even Quark Express at this time. No one was using a computer for graphic design. So it was like protractors and compasses and rulers. It was fascinating. So I did that. And of course, my mother and father always encouraged us to go to museums. We had art books around. We're always watching interesting films. I remember one of my first theater experiences going to see, I think it was Ron, Akira Kurosawa's Ron with my father. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is fascinating. I have to find Throne of Blood. Right. I have to, see Dreams, all of these things. And of course, Hidden Fortress. And then I'm like, you identify these things when the new art comes out and you realize, oh, George Lucas is interested in this, is influenced by this too. And that's become Star Wars. And you see these characters. So art is like, it inadvertently, it permeates everyone's surroundings. So, ours more so, I guess, because our parents' receptors were up. And, especially me as a preteen and teen, I was in such need of guidance that they were throwing everything at me. My brother has had a single focus his entire life, and that's to be an artist, an illustrator. At first, it was like a cartoonist, but, he had advanced so far beyond what I thought was possible by the time, he was like 9 years old that I just literally found a photo of like the first kind of abstract painting I did. And it was like, I had to have been like 14 years old, or 14, 15. And it was when I moved away from like trying to draw like Garfield or shit like that. When my brother was already drawing like, Wolverine and Spider-Man, in full rendered detail,
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so I believe, and you mentioned this earlier, I think you were around 20, you moved back to the States.
Yeah.
So you said it was related to your father having, a second stroke? Explain that to me. Like, how did that equate to you guys moving back to the U.S.?
Well, I came home from school one day. He'd had 2 strokes before, and this was a major stroke, and I found him at the bottom of the stairs. And this time, he was actually paralyzed. And I thought he was dead until I saw his eyes move. And I carried him upstairs in the bed, and I said, I'm going to call an ambulance. I'm going to call an ambulance. And he was like, he could just barely shake his head. No. So I didn't. And my mom came home, and he recovered over about a year, fully, surprisingly, but had enough of being there. during his time in the UK, he helped start what at the time was called the European Football League. I actually have the original brochures from it and everything, in conjunction with the NFL, and coached one of the first American Football League teams called the Cardiff Tigers. He was a huge football fan.
Nice.
And then the Birmingham Bulldogs, and brought in like real legit NFL people into it, and then got cut out of it. So that was disappointing for him. And then he started a restaurant, a live blues and jazz restaurant in a little place called Neal's Yard in Covent Garden, which is absolutely beautiful and charming in central London. Great, one of the best chefs in Great Britain there, this guy Frank Rourke, I think his name was. And one day his partner disappeared with all the money.
Oh, jeez.
Left him high and dry. So it was another crushing defeat for him, and stress. And also, he was a big American personality. He looked everyone in the eye and said, "Hey, how are you?" and really wanted to know how you were. And, British people aren't exactly the most open, and it's a little intimidating. And also, his name was Randy, which is kind of slang for horny in in Great Britain. So, like, "Hey, I'm Randy." "Oh, I bet you are, you fucking pervert," Poor guy.
So just kind of out of place, it sounds like.
Yeah, out of place. And I think he just, I couldn't say this for sure, just my experience, but I think the burden was too great, and he just wanted to be somewhere where he could be him and be free. And that was Michigan. I had never even visited Michigan before. I couldn't even tell you anything about it. So my dad and my brother moved first, and then like almost a year later, I think I moved, and then our mother was staying back to wrap up the house, and then they wouldn't let her in the country. So it took another whole year or so for her to be allowed into the country, even though she had already had a green card and everything.
Was that to Detroit? Did you guys land in Detroit at that point? No.
Strangely enough, my dad came from the publishing business. His grandfather and my great-grandfather were publishers in Michigan, small-town newspapers. So he got a job at a little newspaper in kind of the middle of Michigan in a town called West Branch, which is now just a highway oasis, like a Walmart and a Best Buy and stuff like that. But tiny little kind of, I don't want to say sub-blue collar, but, just a kind of poor working class city. I worked for a year there before we moved down to Detroit area, making slack adjusters for air brakes in a little factory. My shift was 12 hours a day, and it was 7 days a week. And that was
oh, wow.
I saved up money and got a 1966 Volkswagen Beetle, jacked it up, but, Baja style. And we actually went for a drive one day downstate. Our father took us through the area he was born into in Plymouth, Michigan. He was born in the city of Detroit, but they lived in Plymouth. And I remember asking him, like, "Wow, can we live here?" It was beautiful, And, not long after that, we were living there. And that's where my parents lived pretty much until my father died, after my brother and I had moved to New York and all that stuff,
So what prompted your brother and your move to New York?
Well, my brother had the opportunity to go to School of Visual Arts in New York. He had gone to CCS here, and I don't think was finding the challenge he needed. So he moved first to go to SVA. I drove him out there and to his tiny little apartment. And, oh man, it was horrible. And then I stayed here for a few years until I think 2002 and moved out there too. I had had enough of being here. I had like a messy divorce at the time, and it was depressing. And I just needed I wanted to be around my brother, man. He was my best friend, funny and interesting, and
Well, y'all had been through a lot at that point.
Yeah, in retrospect, yeah. I mean, there's going into granular detail on a lot of it. It was kind of tough, for those formative years and those young impressionable minds, but I think that, bonded us together in our later years much better, because we were combative until, late teens at the very least, early 20s, loved each other, but, it was also, we're still competitive,
So, what, you moved out to New York after your brother. What kind of work were you doing out there?
I got into art handling, really. as an artist, and, wanting to be around interesting, artists and people. So, driving a truck around Manhattan, dealing with collectors and gallerists and, other artists and, museum curators, was fascinating. And if you have even the slightest motivation in that line of work, like, you can break into any of that. I just, most people chose to kind of just get stoned and drive around, but I was interested in, let me come and install this. Let me, I'm the guy that, Christie's might call to, prepare, this $137 million Klimt painting for viewing. And they trust me to handle this stuff, and then start to trust my advice, and private curators and collectors would, call me, separately and to advise on certain things. So, I was really able to get my hands dirty and meet a lot of people and network and get, some good ideas of how things, also the dark side, how this is why people become jaded and bitter in the art world. Like, I recognize that. Let me try to avoid that. Cause, or just greedy and bloated,
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get the kind of inner workings behind the scenes of the blue chip art world. And then, all my friends were operating in the kind of starving artist plane, making real interesting, progressive, cool, challenging art, and not having a voice or outlet for it. So, like, living that struggle, but then seeing the people reaping the rewards from those struggles and, blocking out the artist from those rewards, was hugely frustrating.
Well, and I'm sure it opened your eyes in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it definitely informed the way I deal with artists, in both my gallery settings and just in my personal life, or from a mentorship or residency perspective. Yeah, definitely, man.
Were you still doing graffiti while you were in New York? Were you still involved in that community?
No. Well, yeah, you have tons of friends, you're interested in it, and of course like that. But, I think the first 2 trips I had to New York, one, Tris and I got in a fight on St. Mark's and almost got arrested, without someone else, not with each other.
Okay.
And then, we both got arrested in Chinatown, for graffiti related things. And I realized that there was such jeopardy as an adult with a job trying to pursue this. And when you spend a few days in central booking, in a cell made for 20 people with 45 people, and you have to take a shit next to someone's head, things like, and I had already been arrested 40 times in England, in London, and been in jail a lot. I was just over it, and that really, it all came down. I was like, man, I'm not trying to pursue this anymore. I will advocate for it and support it and be interested in it and participate, from an observer supporter role. But yeah, and I never invested in it, so much where I was like, this is my art form. I was much more interested in making music and paintings and drawing, and calligraphy, and not the act of kind of spreading my name.
Sure. While you were in New York, were you, while you were doing the art handling work that you were doing, were you also making studio art at that time?
Yeah. If by studio art you mean the wall next to my bathroom in my apartment, yes. Yeah. My brother had gained enough success at the time to have a proper studio that I could go and use occasionally if I wanted to. But most of the time I was just in my apartment. I'd work on one painting, then put it aside. Work on another painting, put it aside. Let it dry on the balcony, or the fire escape. I say balcony.
Was the work that you were making back then in the same vein as sort of what you're making now, or was it a lot different?
It was a lot different, but it was still. I've always been fascinated with typography and typefaces, and that's why I was interested in graffiti, of course. But so I was still making patterns with letters, and Roman numerals, especially back then. So I have, that was the basis for everything and the foundation for my own art. And I think it comes from my admiration of the kind of the art of language itself, and it being kind of the foundation of interpersonal communication historically, through grunting and groaning and pointing and gesturing to, cave drawings, and, language being the kind of basis for just civilized, just beings, So yeah, it's always informed and it's always been a part of it. It still is. All of my work starts out usually as, digital imagery of typography and text. And a lot of the time it's, it's free thought or poetry that I'm writing that I'm too self-conscious to say out loud. So I turn them into patterns. I turn the words and letters into patterns, and they're contained within that piece of art then.
Very cool. So I think eventually, I think it was 2009, 2010, you made your way back to Detroit, where you still live today, obviously. What brought you back?
Our father died eventually, and I was having a great time in New York. I didn't really have a reason to move, but our mother wanted to go back to school, and it was definitely helpful for me to be able to come step out of the rat race of New York and the perpetual poverty, high rents and things and trying to make art. But our mother wanted to go back to school, and she did, but she couldn't spend the time to sit there and sell the house and all this stuff. So I came back to essentially babysit the house and resolve it in some way. And this is at the height of like the housing crisis. No one was trying to buy a house. Citibank had ripped off my mom, and we didn't know at the time, of course, in the years later that she gets a huge check from Citibank because of all the fraud that was happening. But I was there to do that and burn through all my money. It just took too long, so I found myself here. And I just actually kind of wrote about this. My dog died a few days ago and made a post about it. And it was that moment, where I realized I can't physically go back to New York. I still have an apartment there. I'll have to sublet it. Oh, I actually never even signed over that lease. So someone's still I don't know. sublet. But so I got a dog and settled down and I realized actually my heart rate had lowered and I had space to make art here. There was a garage, it was quiet at night. So why shouldn't I give that a shot,
Nice. Well, and you clearly wasted no time because you exhibited your very first solo show, not long after you got back at 323 East Gallery. How did you first connect with them and start putting that show together?
I had met Jesse Corey years before. I think he had done some work with my mother for one of her theater things or at Y Arts, youth arts program she ran here. So I had known Jesse and we just got to chatting. I think I went to one of their shows looking for galleries to just go, just to socialize and, be around art, and got to chatting and, became good friends and did that. And he and Dan Armand at the time. And it was just nice. The area where the gallery was, Royal Oak, was also kind of in the 90s, like the kind of funky, hip, cool place to hang out. They had back in the day, they had a place called Neo Tokyo and the Oversized Monster Cafe where you could go buy Gundam models or watch, Akira or Fist of the North Star. And it was like funky and cool. And that's, there was goth kids. You could go to record stores. So their gallery was there. So for kind of the gravitational nostalgia brought me. They're good people.
Did you have any connections there in the community when you first got back? Perhaps ones that you made before you moved to New York, or was it a total fresh start?
Yeah, of course. And I had worked in advertising here, making music for television commercials and web commercials and things a lot. So I was connected still in that respect to the creative community. And also as DJ, I make music, so I had all that stuff. And then, like my friend Tom Thews and Rick Manure, who ran C-Pop Gallery, we had deep connections with them. We exhibited there years before that. And little homegrown galleries. So you know a lot of the artists that are still living here and operating. So that made it easy.
So I want to dive a bit more into how you got involved in the community because, a lot of your career is based around the community-oriented work that you've been doing. It's a big part of why I wanted to have you on. And I think it's probably worth also establishing the context around the time period, because you mentioned it earlier. This was right at the height of the financial crisis. They're just coming out of a big, problems with urban flight. And I think the city at one point was even considering selling their art collection to like get out of bankruptcy, a big mess. So what was that atmosphere like for you? Was that daunting, or did you see it as like an opportunity?
It was daunting, of course. And when you can't see a future, it's hard to live in the present in a lot of ways, especially as an artist. And I'm a generic white, dude. Like I have all of the opportunity. And if it's tough for me, you can't even imagine who it's even harder for. And that's always, at the top of mind for me, growing up with such a diverse group of friends and family. Just being self-aware. So at the time it was tough, but I was, actively pursuing being an artist and connecting and trying to curate shows and, put people on and give people voices. And, eventually Jesse Corey from 323 started dating a woman named Rula David, a wonderful woman named Rula David, who worked for Red Bull at the time. And brought me on as an advisor, and ultimately we developed the Red Bull Arts program out of that first meeting, where I was responsible for formulating kind of the structurally how it works from an artist perspective and a curatorial perspective, and what we do, and set forth the tone and kind of internal organization for it, and that just evolved. Every year it evolved more and more, ultimately to the point where we were actually empowered to do what I kind of at the beginning thought would be possible. But you have to prove this concept over and over, which is tough. It's hard. It takes commitment and willingness to be disappointed and fail constantly.
Well, for sure. And also, there's another organization that you were involved with early on called the Contra Projects, which I think in 2012, you and 323 East Gallery led this Detroit beautification project, which I wanted to ask you about. Tell me about that. Like, how did that all get started, and what was this beautification project that you were involved with?
Yeah. Contra Projects was a gallery my brother and I started with our friend Tom Thews, and we exhibited at a couple art fairs in New York and things like that. And ultimately, not everything works out, so it kind of dissolved. So doing that, I also, developed a really good friendship with the 323 East guys. So naturally, when actually, it's funny. A friend named Jamie O'Shea, who used to be an editor at Juxtapose, connected me to someone who was moving to Detroit at the time, named Revoke, graffiti writer. And so met up with Revoke, and we started chatting, and he wanted to do a project, bringing a bunch of artists. And so it was actually the Detroit beautification project we did together, and brought in 323 East at the time for certain components of it. And it just evolved. It was a nice experience. I think everyone had fun. But at the same time, I was also starting a new gallery called Library Street Collective, with a gentleman named Anthony Curris. And so it was a perfect opportunity to bring Jason Revoke in for that kind of one of the first few shows we had there. And it was good. It was fun. It was, lots of layers to people in their personal and business life here. It's a small city,
Sure. And so you mentioned Library Street Collective, because I wanted to ask you about that, because you have been involved in quite a lot. So that was the same year as the beautification project, 2012. How did you first get started with the Library Street Collective? What was involved with that?
Well, Anthony and his brother owned a building in downtown Detroit, and they had a gallery in there before that. It wasn't their passion. I don't want to get into their personal feelings about it, but closed that gallery and asked me if I would, want to partner in a new gallery. So we said, yeah, let's do it. Let's figure out what to do. So we just decided to go with what I knew best, and that was a lot of, younger, unknown contemporary artists and street artists and things that I'm actually interested in as well. So it just started to kind of unfold from there. Ultimately, that relationship, after a few years, just got a little heavy, and I left the gallery sold my half of it, and just to pursue. I was being rewarded so much more personally, emotionally, and spiritually from the residency program, and helping elevate kind of unheard younger voices, rather than trying to work with bigger and bigger, more famous artists. That just didn't appeal to me as much. Just kind of wanted to move on and do that, and also pursue my own. I'm an artist, man. I need time to do that. I can't have like 5 jobs, and
Well, that was what I was going to say. Is you were starting up Red Bull and the activities that evolved into what you're still doing today, at the same time that you're doing Library Street Collective and trying to be an artist yourself. How were you juggling all these things back then?
I've always liked to be busy. I work well under pressure usually, and that's when my leadership qualities kind of actually come out. I'm pretty much a loser otherwise. But having a lot on my plate forces me to organize and prioritize things. So then I have to really be careful in my planning. It's like, okay, from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. I can be in my studio making art. Then I sleep till 7 or 8. Then I have meetings and I have to, it just forces me into that kind of structure. I don't love that, to be honest, because, I'm human. I get tired and, emotional. And, I have a wonderful wife I love being around. She's my best friend. I want to spend time with her, our dogs. I have kids, there's all this other stuff too.
Yeah.
It's just tough.
So let's talk about Red Bull, because you mentioned getting involved with that. How did that first take off? Because I know it's evolved quite a bit and become a lot bigger than it first was. But what started it all?
Yeah, it's funny. I had worked kind of in periphery to Red Bull in New York a few times with my brother for art initiatives. So I had a good base of knowledge of how they approached participating in the art world. So this was an opportunity to kind of change that dynamic. So it's not, hey, let's give everyone a Red Bull can and let them make art. Let's just give them an opportunity to make their own art. So this kind of came out of that mentality, or frame of mind. So giving artists a space and opportunity and resources to pursue their own art, not forcing them to make corporate art, and Red Bull really embraced that. And they've been so supportive, and just championing, every time there's a new layer we can peel back or level we can jump up to, they've been there, taking the first leap. So it started as a local residency with 8 to 12 artists. They come in and use the studio space to give them a small stipend, and we have an exhibition, a big group show. And then it evolved ultimately into a live-in residency where 9 people a year participate, and they come in and live here. They're offered a very generous stipend and accommodations and travel and a supply assistant budget and things like that. And we have a curatorial fellowship that happens once a year. We have micro grants that happen, twice a month for $1,000 each for local artists. And that's being rolled out nationally to I think 12 other cities now, which I'm super proud of that. That's a program I developed from scratch with my friend Gabe Chess and Steve Balzer here in Red Bull. We talked about that idea around a campfire. And they said, what's the most kind of sincere way we can actually engage with these artists? Just money. Give them the freedom to do what they need to do. So that came out of that conversation around a campfire in Hurricane, Utah. Yeah.
What is Red Bull as a company? What is their interest in the arts? How does that connect back to their company and their brand?
Well, I think ultimately everyone participates in creative lifestyle, whether they like it or not, or in fashion or interested in photography or whatever. They listen to music. So we all are interested in culture, just as humans, I think, generally. And Red Bull has a knack for hiring people who are experts in the fields they're really interested in. So you have this culture of people who are into cool music, into cool art already. So it makes sense that you would kind of pursue these areas of business that are populated with the people you want to appeal to, right? I mean, that
right.
Just makes sense from a business perspective as a cultural balance for your brand, where you can do the heavy, sports marketing and the stuff, the energy drink world stuff, and also play in these other areas, and really in a sincere and genuine and respected way, where you're actually a voice and an advocate and a leader, and respected as such, because you're investing the time and energy and resources in the people that kind of create those worlds and neighborhoods,
How involved are they in the day-to-day activities that you guys do?
Day-to-day, they're, I don't know how to say this, but they're very hands-off. They hire people they trust. So they trust you to make the right decisions and trust you to find new and innovative ways to kind of be a brand ambassador, I guess. It's honestly the exact opposite of the corporate experience I expected. Having worked, I can't believe Walter Thompson, or, agencies and other companies before. There's great freedom there, and great trust. And I appreciate that, and I give them credit for it,
Yeah, that's really cool. You mentioned the residency program, which has been a big part of what you do there for a while. Originally, I think it was something that you guys you chose the artist, but now it's, I think, since turned into an application-based process where you have a selection committee, stuff like that. How are the selection committees formed, and are they based out of Detroit? Is it sort of a selection across the U.S.? Like, what is that like?
Sure. Well, we have, internally our kind of Red Bull Arts team. We think about the kind of people we want to engage and the kind of people we want to be advocating on our behalf, and choosing the artists that best represent, the diverse and interesting kind of layers of the art world we want to participate in. So, there's like Legacy Russell in New York, or there's curators we look to, artists we look to. Ira D. Matthews, who's a poet who's from Detroit but lives in Philadelphia. She was on the selection committee. Laura Reykjavik, the ex-director at the Queen's Museum. Like, we'll reach out to people that we think will add value to the experience, not only for us in the decision-making for these artists, but for the artists to, have been chosen by these, monumental, like, important figures in the world we exist in, in the art world. These people who are thoughtful, leaders. So it's part like service to us, and make sure we're getting the best of what we can get out of people. And not necessarily like the skill level, but the desire and the need, and also providing for these artists, even the people that don't make it through the last phase of the selection committee. We provide feedback for those people, and we ask the selection committee to provide feedback that we can offer to those people. As an artist myself, like, I wish all these people could have been looking at my artwork and telling me what they thought, like, even that, to have someone's like, a well-known curator look at your work and give you feedback is a huge deal.
Yeah.
So it's in service of a lot of things. I'm genuinely proud of it and enjoy it thoroughly. And I'm glad, for years, it's easy to choose a bunch of artists and put them together and try to pair personalities and a diverse style of techniques and artists and personalities. But it's a challenge to find those people and still make it work. Before I was able to really control the environment and say, okay, I know this person might be an asshole, so I don't want to put them in with these, 7 other like really cool people, Now we just had to find a way to make it work. And it's been a challenge, to be honest.
Really? Is that something that was a recent change, or was it the last couple of years? Or?
In the last couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's still it's an adventure, man. It's fun.
Well, and another evolution that's happened in the last few years is the introduction of the curatorial fellowship that you mentioned earlier. How does that work? Is that where you guys provide the space for somebody to curate a show on your behalf?
Yeah, not even necessarily, I wouldn't say on our behalf, but create a space for them to curate an exhibition that they're interested in. It's all of their doing. So we'll provide the gallery space for them, or an alternative space, depending on what it is, and a stipend or travel stipend, an office to work in here. Taylor Aldridge, our current curatorial fellow, lives here. Well, currently is living here, so it's easy. But yeah, it would just give them the freedom to do what they need to do for them, and lift up and elevate the voices they feel need to be elevated. Trust people to help spread a message or hope or whatever it is.
What form of feedback do they get? I mean, with the artist residency, it's very clear. You get kind of feedback in the form of judges, giving you advice or whatever. What about the curators?
So sometimes people just know exactly what they want to do. They know how to do it, and we just are there as support staff. And sometimes people like to bounce ideas off you, and we have everyone who works there is either an artist or has been working in the arts for many years. So we have, probably maybe 70 years of combined experience in different ways to offer, even in, casual chats. Most of the time is spent casually discussing little details, that lead to like big changes sometimes. But it's different for everyone, some people are kind of fresh and new and not confident, and some people know exactly what they want to say.
And you just kind of give them the freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having done this for a number of years now, have you been able to keep up with some of the people that have gone through the program and kind of track their careers? Oh,
definitely. All of them really. I mean, of course you follow everyone on social media. I'm interested in what they're doing, a young lady who participated in one of the early residencies, just had a baby recently, and she actually did a portrait of my dog, Churchill, that just died recently. So I posted a picture of that and tagged her. She's like, I know that she just had a child. It's like there's tons of other people and other better known artists who are still like really actively pursuing a career in the arts. And there's people whose art appeals to me personally that I just love, like Rashawn Rucker, Ty Sawyer, Michael Reeder, Drew Merritt. There's Tiff Massey. I'm friends with all these people. Even if I wasn't before, we become friends.
Yeah.
So of course I'm invested emotionally. Like I want to see these people succeed. My brother and I talk all the time about, maybe our success or someone's success. I mean, ours, generally anyone. Is being that person at the right time for another person to find that success. And if you can be satisfied with that as your life's work, then that's a pretty fucking big deal.
Hell yeah, man. That must be incredibly fulfilling to kind of just see all of these success stories that you've helped make happen,
Well, it's not even, they've made that happen. It's not because of me. I've been able to be there and encourage them, fortunately for me, and it's strange to think about, but I'm actually like the luckiest out of all of them. I get to deal with all these artists, a lot of them in kind of vulnerable times, figuring out what they want to do, how they want to do it, new techniques, new approaches, whatever that is. So I reap the rewards from these times because I'm insecure. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm 46 years old, and I still break down in tears and wonder how I'm going to get through it. You know what I mean? So it's supremely rewarding to follow and just know that I've been able to be a friend to a person. At the very least.
Yeah, no doubt. One thing that's been on really the forefront of a lot of people's minds, especially right now, is racial diversity.
Yeah.
And it's actually something that came up in my conversation with Faith 47 in the last episode. We were talking about, her role as a female in a male-dominated community. And she was pointing out the fact that not only is the art community really, in general, male-dominated, but it's also white male dominated.
Yeah.
And, it's something that curators could really work towards helping to improve, ensuring that there's a better mix of Black people, of Indigenous people, people of color, so that they're given the same kinds of opportunities. And you're quite literally in the business of providing people with opportunities. So are there ways that that Red Bull Arts and really just curators in general can help make that better?
There always is. That's not ending in our lifetime. We're always going to have to work really hard and strive for those kind of instances where we can learn and create opportunities and just listen to what people need. Our program is based in it's a black city. We need to listen to the populace here. There are tons of young black artists. Like, okay, let's find them. Let's listen to them. Let's see, like, what can we provide that's useful for artists in general, but specifically for this group here who doesn't have a lot of opportunity, to be honest. Detroit isn't like a place you typically look to for an art career, It's very, you just have to be, just be there. Just be there to support and be there to like jump at opportunities. Like there's shit that I do in my private life that I can't even talk about because I get in trouble, where I'm like providing opportunities for people that I love and care about of color here in the city, that I'm super proud of, but I'm not supposed, it's like it's funny, but you just be open, man. Just be a fucking human being.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not that hard.
Yeah, you would think, it seems so obvious, like when you say it out loud, but it seems like a lot of people miss that,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your own art. While your work is firmly rooted in more of the abstract realm, you actually do incorporate aspects of nature into a lot of your work. For instance, your show last year, Metamorphic, from what I understand, was heavily inspired by natural patterns found in layers of rock in the earth. So has nature always been a heavy focus for you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Nature, in general, but more so the kind of real world visual experience. It could be nature in urban area or nature in the middle of nowhere. It's always part of the layering, and that's what I guess it's time. It's nostalgia. It's time travel for me, really. When you're in a subway and you see a poster that's peeled off, and you see 6 or 7 other posters behind it. That's this wonderful, weird history. Like, who stood in front of this 7 layers ago, and how many layers did they see back? And and it's the same thing I see in geological formations, or a forest or a mountaintop, or the desert. It's fascinating to me. So all of it ultimately is finding ways for me to connect with the world around me, and also kind of be the insecure, totally unstable, person that I am, and use those things to mask what I want to say about it, and a lot of it's just reassurances to myself, so those patterns come from, words and letters that mean something to me, but then I use them to kind of build the environment that I'm thinking about those things in. So it might be Moab, Utah, might be Death Valley, California, might be Brooklyn, New York, but when those things affect me and I start to remember and really investigate like what those feelings are, then those words come, and then those words are associated with that place, and then that place becomes the physical manifestation in the painting, and it's the act of making it is the kind of the healing in a lot of ways. It's fun. I would love to be a successful artist. I don't, what I mean? I'd love to be, aspire to whatever fame that is. But I'm also happy to just make art. You know what I mean? I enjoy making the art, the work. It's a challenge, and it's meditative, and if that's not enough for you, I think you're making a mistake if you're pursuing the fame and fortune in anything, really. That's just my opinion. What the fuck do I know? But I'm happy. So
Right. No, well, and I've noticed that like process definitely seems to be an important aspect of, almost as important as the final product. I've watched some of the process videos that I found online, and you seemed very kind of into the process of making.
Sure.
Laying down layer after layer after layer. Is that it almost seemed meditative in some way? Is that a big part of that for you?
Of course it is. Yeah, that's the part of it for me. It's such a chaotic world we live in now. Like finding time to think and digest experiences and thoughts and emotions. For me, that all happens when I'm making a painting. That's the time when my mind is most free. I'll find myself sometimes after a couple hours of working on some paintings or a painting, have thought through a whole other aspect of my life and come to a decision. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm just subconsciously or unconsciously just doing these two actions at the same time, and they're both going where I want them to go and leading to some kind of resolution. But you never know what that is, and I think that's enticing for me, the unknown,
And speaking of the unknown, is experimentation something that you like to embrace with your process? Do you like to inject the sort of, uncertainty into it?
Yeah, I think in my process specifically, like I only use spray paint pretty much. I've experimented with everything else. There's other materials that I love for different things, but spray paint provides me the biggest challenge to create the most diverse kind of representations and effects, of things it could be. And I've taught myself to anticipate certain things and use, some things I'll cut with acetone, or I'll cut with xylene, or I'll cut with alcohol because I know it creates this effect. And a lot of it is I can control the journey. I just can't control the destination. And it's terrifying. But, oftentimes, when you go on enough journeys, you can kind of anticipate the destination. And more often than not, it's, if not acceptable, it's actually wonderful, or unexpected, and I just love that.
So when you're starting on a piece, how much of it do you have figured out up front? Because it sounds like a lot of the final product is almost a surprise to you as well.
Yeah, the patterns I spend a lot of time making and playing with, but all of the other elements outside and inside those lines are just spur of the moment. Sometimes I'll think about something I might like to do, and 90% of the time it was the wrong thing to do. I just have to get in and start kind of moving things around and seeing how things feel. And lately it's been brighter and brighter colors, I think, as I've needed more sunshine in my life, or more lighthearted, self-discussion. I don't know.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that, and this is something I didn't know, was that a lot of it starts as poetry for you.
Yeah.
As far as like writing, I didn't realize you wrote poetry. Is that something that you would ever feel confident enough to share, or is it purely input to your paintings?
Funny enough, I'm actually a published poet.
Okay.
And that one poem that was published happened in 1982, and it's in a book that I still own.
Okay.
Anyway, but that has nothing to do with it. But no, it's more, I guess, free thought than it is poetry. There's a cadence to it, but it's not structured like that. And it's more saying things that I would like to say to someone, or something that I might not be able to in the physical world anymore, or trying to express something that I'm not, don't have the strength to express, right now. So some of it, manifests in the form of poetry, and most of it is in kind of free thought and words. And then these words become like so heavy gravitationally that, I'll focus on that thing, and then that word becomes the pattern, or that word is the anchor in the kind of communication,
Considering that graffiti and street art has been a big part of your career, especially early on, and really is kind of in the DNA of what you do. Is it something you still feel connected to? Even though you're not able to go out and paint in the streets yourselves, do you still feel that connection?
I do, because I have so many friends that still actively participate. My brother paints murals and does, quote unquote street art. So we know a lot. A lot of my best friends are still graffiti writers. So of course it's unavoidable. And also I just love it too. Aesthetically, it's beautiful and dangerous and sexy and also like it's in another way. It's kind of like watching, egomaniacs, like compete, my name is bigger and more colorful than your name, and I love it. It's fascinating. Not being like a, pretty self-conscious, person. It's interesting to see people with more confidence, do these things, that I could never like take credit for, because, I wasn't confident in my work.
Well, I mean, you and your brother did collaborate on a piece for Powwow last year, right? I think it was called Rabindra, which from what I've read was paying homage to your uncle Ralph. Tell me about your uncle and how did he become an inspiration, I guess, for that piece?
Well, he was a rock and roll musician from Glasgow, Scotland, who my parents met in California. We're not related, but I was like an infant when we met. And he just lived with us and became Uncle Binda, Ralph. But he was one of those people who was, an artist his whole life, who was in our life, just another, influence there, constantly pressing us to explore and find these things. So that mural, he had just died. He lived in Tokyo for a few decades before dying. And had created this whole other life as an artist as well, but with a totally different type of art. It was fascinating. But that was to kind of pay homage to him and, his influence on us, as just not only an artist, but a person of compassion and humor and thoughtfulness, in how he approached the world and how he operated in dealing with other people. It was more so that was such a profound influence than it was the art specifically. Just, yeah.
Very nice.
So that was to honor him,
How did you guys break that work down for the wall?
It's funny. We made kind of, we've done this a few times when we've worked together. We kind of make a mood board of things that a little collage of things we think would be important to tell this story or be included in this message. And, came down to a couple of things like, it's funny enough, a lot of the most superficial things, like he loved Elvis and he loved Japanese women, and then all the little details in the background, were a little more kind of under the surface and more in depth and thoughtful, and the passport stamps, and things like that, and all the language. But it also, the art can't just be telling the story of how important he was to us. It has to be visually appealing to people walking by and the business owner who has to live with this thing. So the style it was done in, when he moved to Japan, he was doing this style that was very minimal. It was black and white. So imagine like a white piece of paper and you just saw the black stripes of a zebra and the rest of it was knocked out into the background, or a cheetah or a tiger, all in black and white, very minimal. So we took that concept and made all of the art exists within the stripes of the tiger.
Nice.
And that's how we kind of, moved through that.
So even the visual aesthetic was paying homage to him.
Oh yeah, of course. The way we signed it, the red dot was his thing, and that came from one of his first forays into the minimal wildlife paintings. He cut his finger and there was a drop of blood near the area where you would sign a painting, and he signed it. And then he became, that became his kind of thing, little red dot.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize all those connections.
Yeah.
Do you like working on collaborations, like in general?
I don't, because I'm usually the one with less skill. And then the other person, people ask me to collaborate all the time, and I'm honored. But I don't feel like I'm the right collaborator. My art mostly works for me, and I have a hard time creating. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but with Tristan, is my brother, and I think he knows me well enough to open the doors that I need opened to collaborate. He just knows what they are, and I've only ever really collaborated with Tristan. I don't really see happy collaboration outside of our relationship, we just know each other, so he knows how to treat me. And honestly, he does most of the fucking work anyway. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, I think the way you described the joy that you take in the process, I think that makes a lot of sense because it seems very personal, and seems a lot of it is just your own kind of navigation through your work. And
sure.
How do you bring somebody else into that? Like that,
Yeah. I'm not like painting a picture of a fucking dragon or something. Like, I don't know. I don't even think I'm capable of doing that anymore. I did study, but it doesn't interest me, so how could I make it interesting for someone else I don't know. It's just weird.
Makes sense.
It's hard to explain.
So let's talk a little bit about what you have coming up. Art-wise, are you working on any new shows that you have coming up?
I do have an exhibition in October at M Contemporary Art here in Ferndale, Michigan, where I live. Melanie Chard, who owns and runs the gallery, is wonderful and supportive, and I just can't say enough good things about her. She's just awesome. She has a great stable of artists too, that's like diverse in every way. And I love being around these people too, and I consider them all friends. So I do have that coming up, and I'm at the studio like almost every day, man. I'm just working on stuff. I try things out, and occasionally something will work, and I'll send a picture to my wife, and I'll be super excited about it, and then she'll be like, "Oh, that's garbage." And then I'll like, "Well, what about
this?"
Harsh
critic.
Well, what about this? And she'll love it. So it's nice having like her perspective on things is entirely different than mine. And I love having that kind of genuine, honest opinion and support in my life. Willing to tell me the truth.
So the show in October, have you already finished the work for it, or are you still working on it?
Well, I started working on it, a bunch of pieces, and then the pandemic hit, and then, George Floyd's death happened, and that changed a lot of my perspective on how I wanted to spend my time. So I used that time instead to make pieces that I could use for charitable donations, or to sell and then provide that money to, through the gallery too. We've done, I made 36, 24 by 36 paintings on paper that were for the show originally, that we decided just to donate, for people that were able to create recurring donations with a bunch of local charities as well. So not just like a one-time donation. If you can prove, even if it's $3 a month you're providing, then you can get a painting for free. There were, those paintings I think we sell for like $600 or $800 or something like that. So you get good value, I think. So that kind of changed everything. So now I'm getting back into setting forth into kind of what I need to do for the show. I still have a bunch of stuff that I'm making for, charitable, donations and purposes, and trades. I love trading with other artists, so I'm always making stuff for trades.
Awesome.
But I do have a plan for the show. I always plan them out well in advance. I know exactly what size, where everything's going to go out. I think about how it's going to be laid out, and the experience of walking through, and what I'm trying to say, and how they exist together. And then all the writing that accompanies the show too. The title, all of it.
Have you figured out the title yet, or?
I haven't yet, but it'll just change. I've had so many things happen this year that have been so dramatically emotional, that I can't quite say for sure yet. But I know that I've been affected emotionally and physically by things this year that I haven't in past. So I'm sure it won't be so self-reflective as it has in the past. Metamorphic and Araf and all the shows before. have been very much about my personal experience in certain places with certain emotions or people. And there's a lot more that I've shared this year with, we've all shared, globally even, I'm amazed to see people, I grew up in London, England with posting about, John Lewis or, it's like, it's crazy. Like, I love that, it makes you really feel like, part of a global community, especially, when we're at the effect of such tyrannical fucking maniacs.
Yeah.
There's a moral obligation to, appeal to a higher sensibility, so I feel that definitely in my own art.
No, that's amazing. And you're right. It definitely feels like the world has sort of come together, at least segments of the world have come together and recognized the inherent value of everyone else.
Yeah.
So what about Red Bull Arts? Anything you guys have coming up that you want to talk about?
Well, for the safety of our participants, we have rescheduled all of our programming for this year. So everyone who was supposed to participate in the residency this year is participating next year during the same time they had scheduled. That includes the curatorial fellowship. So the one thing we are continuing to do are our micro grants, of course. So that continues through the whole year. And we had an exhibition and installation in progress already for a show we're doing with a local musician here. That we're finding kind of new and interesting ways to still make happen. So we'll still continue to build this installation, the gallery, and then maybe the opening is just that it's open. We don't have a party or a big opening, and a lot of it exists online, and there's social distancing, and we're going to great lengths to make sure we're providing a safe environment for people, and that really started to amplify even a year ago, making things accessible for people with disabilities or special needs in our space. So it's been fascinating, and I'm loving trying to address all these problems that we have just in such a weird building, and then also being part of a large corporation, and not everyone needs to or feels a need to adopt these certain practices and social practices that we do in our space, our physical space. So anyway, we're spending a lot of time, formulating plans and coming up with usable, tangible documents that we can even provide to our community, and how best to participate in the most inclusive and open way. And I'm very proud of that. And a lot of that work is behind the scenes. It's not public work. We spend a lot of time with advisors and local experts and foundations and organizations here. So we're having a lot more time this year to do that, which is, also takes time. It's work.
Yeah, no, it's great that you're able to at least take this time where everything else is sort of in pause to do other more, equally fulfilling, I guess, work.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I love it. And it's more challenging, to be honest. There's a lot of, things you have to confront about the realities of, either your physical space or your attitude toward things, or, things you've thought before or let people think before or haven't thought enough about before,
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Very cool. All right. Well, where can people find you online?
Oh man, I'm social media, of course. I think I only have Instagram. I actually have a Twitter, but I'm not going to tell you what that is because that's only for my political rants. But Matt Eaton is Nobody on Instagram, and then I have a website that's matteatonisnobody.com that I fucking never update, and I am an idiot. But I'm using this time to do that too, and I'll have my web store back up and all that stuff, and a little more information, but that's about it, man. I'm not out there too much.
Right on. Very cool. Well, last question, and this is something I like to ask everybody.
Sure.
Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh man, they have to be living, of course, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Man, there's how high can I aspire to? I don't know. There's people like Wangechi Mutu or Sarah Morris that are super famous. I don't know if we can access them. But there are some people that I think whose life experience and perspective would be really interesting and valuable, who have deep and meaningful things to say. And I think people like Rashawn Rucker, who's a local artist here in Detroit that is just amazing, would probably be my first choice, just in the lessons that life teaches you and the perseverance of the creative spirit. He has children, one with severe autism, and he doesn't have a lot of space to work, and yet his work is, I can't even describe it, man. It's otherworldly and important, and it's such a personal story for him. I would love to hear him talk about it,
Awesome.
I'd love other people to know about him too.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved it.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Matt. I really loved what Matt had to say about the conversation that he and his brother will often have. Talking about how that if they can be the person at the right place and the right time for another person to help that person find success, how fulfilling that can be. And perhaps that could be a metric for success. And that if you can be satisfied in that as a life's work, it could make a pretty big difference. That really resonated with me, and I think that captures Matt's entire career to a T. He's lived those words and has really devoted his own career to giving artists that opportunity to find success. What an incredibly selfless and benevolent enterprise. Be sure to keep an eye out for Matt's upcoming solo show, which opens in October at Contemporary Art there in Ferndale. It'll be interesting to see how he turns the focus more outward with this one, rather than being the inward reflections that his shows have traditionally represented. Follow his Instagram for more info on specific opening and closing dates. So thanks again to Matt for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. If you happen to have Apple Podcasts, rating and reviewing the show there is actually a great way to help out. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.